All right, what's going on, guys? It's your host, as always, Daniel DeBrocke. Thank you so much for joining us on the Stack Strength podcast. And today I'm sitting down with Stan Efferding. This is the second time he's been on the podcast. And we're going to be talking all about constructing an optimal lifestyle for optimizing your performance in bodybuilding and strength sports. So first off, Stan, thanks for jumping back on, man. It's good to have you here.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate the invite.
Can you give a little bit of a background just of yourself in terms of why people should be listening to you, basically? I know you've got a pretty extensive history, but I'm familiar.
Because I'm OCD, ADHD, and I was a scrawny kid, and I spent the last 30 years trying to figure all that out for myself. And along the way, learned a lot of lessons between exercise science in college and coaching high school soccer and the University of Oregon track and football teams, and then going on to work with clients and competing professionally in bodybuilding and setting world records in powerlifting for over 25 years. And now at 55, I'm still, I think, staying pretty healthy, and my performance is still pretty good. So I kind of exceeded my genetic potential, and I'm living to tell about it.
So a couple of qualifications, not too many though. Awesome. So I guess one of the places that I wanted to start was, everyone kind of has a bit of a different starting point, essentially. So whether, someone's brand new to training or whether they've been training for a really long time, a lot of the times, especially as you become better and you become more advanced, you kind of run out of things to really tweak and work on, especially inside the gym. And so it really starts to lead you outside. Like, what is my sleep like? What is my stress like? How's my digestion? Things like that. And so when you're working with a client, and maybe you can break this up into, or I'm not sure if you do differentiate between more, beginner, intermediate versus advanced athletes, but how does that sort of conversation occur, and what sort of things are you looking for to kind of adjust and to optimize to really start to bolster their performance?
Yeah, I mean, with beginners, I'm just trying to create a habit. Compliance is the science. Those folks, I just want to get them consistently in the gym training and consistently eating a sufficient amount of calories and protein and consistently sleeping. It's all three, and collectively, of course, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. They'll see much better progress rather than investing themselves into any one of those things. And so I focus mostly on, how do I make this convenient? How do I make it simple, sensible, and sustainable to fit their lifestyle? If they ask me when should they train, I say, when can you train? They ask me, what should I eat? I ask them, what do you like to eat and when do you like to eat? And then let's just try and increase your protein and eat more whole foods. And as for sleep, I mean, that's difficult. Can you reasonably get 7+ hours a night? It's a prerequisite, to be honest with you, for long-term progress in health. And so we mitigate some of the things that might be distracting from that. Obviously scrolling your phone at night, and next thing you know, it's after midnight before you finally fall asleep, and discouraging them from thinking they have to get up at 4 a.m. to do fasted cardio, and in fact the sleep would probably serve them better. And so that's my beginners. I'm just mostly trying to make it fun, make it consistent, make it convenient, provide them and make it such that it doesn't negatively impact their their work or their family, or those kinds of things. So it doesn't feel like they're sacrificing something. Consistency is key. Compliance is the science. As people progress, I'm mostly focused on trying to get them to adhere to the science-based principles rather than getting distracted. I think, as you probably know as well, it seems like 90% of what we do now is probably have to rein our clients in from getting distracted by all the nonsense that's out there. They'll see something on Instagram or hear something or read a sound bite of an article and suddenly think that that's groundbreaking. And what we discover after many, many years of experience is there is no magic. There are no hacks or special tricks that are going to give you some monstrous gain or take you to the next level. The fundamentals, the foundation is most important. So like you said, I pull out a sheet, and I make a spreadsheet with the days of the month across the top, and a list of the things that should be constantly adhered to and monitored. Hours of sleep, I weigh them daily. We look at their workouts. Are they getting their meals in daily? And I just have them track that so they can have some sort of accountability as to whether or not the big rocks are being managed. And then, beyond that, I just don't want them to waste time in the gym doing, junk volume. As you become an intermediate advanced lifter, you really have to knuckle down on, first and foremost, mechanical tension, and then gradually growing volume, and just making sure that every set you do is an effective set, or you're just not going to make progress.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think that's a great approach. It's very simple, and I think the thing too is when a lot of people hear this, it's pretty intuitive. I think the problem that a lot of individuals run into is they understand what they need to do generally, but they don't necessarily know how to implement it. And that's where usually people struggle. I often hear people lack education on diet and exercise. And it's like, not really. Most people, if you ask them, they know they need to exercise more. They know they can identify healthy foods. They can identify that they should be, sleeping and managing stress. But then when it comes down to actually like, okay, I know what healthy foods are, but how do I construct a meal? How do I get that extra hour if I'm not tired? So when it comes to actually implementing some of these behaviors, how do you go about sort of progressing them from wherever they're at into kind of where you want them to be optimally?
That's a great question, because you said, how do we get them from where they're at to progressively optimize? We don't want to make too many drastic changes right out of the gate to too many things. I think you set people up for failure if you don't gradually create consistent habits. Some people, when they start programs, they try and design this ideal magical program, and oftentimes you don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And the best laid plans not executed are worthless. And so, I start, say, with sleep. I have them set an alarm for when when they're supposed to get ready for bed, as opposed to wake up. And then I've got a little list, and this is a hard one because it's just a matter of discipline, really. Are you going to put your phone away and turn it off an hour or two before bed? And that's probably the number one distraction. And then, do you wake up at the same time every day, get exposed to sunlight? Do you have a cool, dark, quiet room? Is it peaceful? Or do you have your kids or the dog in bed, in which case you're not, you're breaking up your REM sleep every hour on the hour when they start fidgeting and moving and squawking. And if you've got apnea, do you have a CPAP? That's a monster for a lot of the athletes in particular that we work with that are big guys that are squatting a lot. They have thick necks and it crowds the airway. They snore and wake up tired, and it's very detrimental, not just to their performance, but to their overall health, their blood pressure, blood sugars, etc. So sleep's the big one. That's why I track it every single day. Maybe get an Oura ring or something. And it's as a matter of trying to hold you accountable to yourself and start tracking it. The Oura ring for me wasn't the information necessarily regarding REM sleep or stage 4 sleep. It was how many hours did I actually sleep? And when I put that thing on at night, it kind of forced me to recognize that there's a goal I'm shooting for here, and it stares me in the face in the morning. If it says 5.5 hours, I know that's a problem. And if I'm tracking that consistently, I recognize that as being a huge detriment. Cardio is another big one. I mean, I don't prescribe a 40-minute cardio to clients. I just don't. It's not sustainable. It's not terribly effective for weight loss. It's not enjoyable. I mean, it's the first thing that gets sacrificed. There's too many barriers to entry, getting in your car, driving to the gym, getting on a treadmill. So I do the 10-minute walks, and I try and attach it to a meal. Anytime you have a regular behavior and you attach something to it, it's more likely that additional habit can be formed. And so eat a meal, take a walk. Eat a meal, take a walk. If you got to get a recumbent or a stationary bike in your living room, eat a meal, jump on the bike. That's what Hofthor does in his garage after every meal up in Iceland, even when it's snowing outside and he can't make it out for a walk. And when you see big guys like Hofthor and Brian Shaw, Lane Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles has a huge workload. He's training every day for football, still takes a 10-minute walk after his meals, helps with digestion and blood sugar control and recovery. So that's the big one. If I could just get people to increase their step count, and we're probably talking about more of the beginners in that regard, but I certainly employ it for everyone. And then with diet, the number one method for adhering to a diet is meal prep. Whether you prep or you hire a prep company, That's what all the successful bodybuilding figure bikini girls and guys have been doing for decades. They walk around with a six-pack bag full of plastic Tupperware, and they're largely successful as a result of that habit. And so I encourage people to prep your meals, and you know how much, you're already portion controlled. You aren't running around to a fast food place or getting hungry for something and then grabbing what it is you're hungry for, which tends to lead to overeating just because of food reward. So I encourage that as probably one of the primary benefactors. And then just getting more protein in your meals, eating more whole foods, of course, trying to get rid of some of the ultra processed, highly palatable foods in the house, the snacks and boxes and stuff, and replacing them with low calorie snacks, whether it be a low sugar beef jerky or some popcorn or just some fat-free Greek yogurt with blueberries, things that you could use in place of the things that are very calorie dense that you probably overconsume.
Hmm. So you said a couple of things that I want to touch back on. One of the big things was you talked about awareness, right? Like, so when you bought the Aura Ring, it wasn't necessarily to track how many cycles of REM you got or how many times you went through the different stages. It was just about, hey, I'm probably not getting as much sleep as I ought to. And I think that single act alone is so incredibly powerful. And I mean, any coach will know this. You get your brand new client to start a food journal, all of a sudden their diet cleans up, even without requesting anything.
Yep.
And anyone who's tried that personally will also sort of know in the back of their head that they kind of did that.
Yeah, and I don't mean to interrupt, but on that note, I have all my clients take a picture of every meal they eat every day and text it to me. And it's not for my information necessarily; it's for theirs. Just are you accountable?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that adds such a huge element because a lot of the times, when you hear people, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, especially when I hear people saying, "Oh, I've tried diet, I've tried dieting, I've tried all this stuff." I just think about it from like the training perspective. Let's just sort of put nutrition on hold for a second. Let's just talk about training. If you train for 10 or 15 years and you train consistently and you train hard, I don't see how any possible outcome could be anything other than just you being super jacked and strong relative to where you started. And so when I hear people who say, "Oh, I've dieted, I've tried this, I've tried that," it's like, well, how long did you try it for? Like, are these little intermittent bouts or are they like consistent all the way through? Because I really struggle to believe that people will consistently diet, like consistently for years and not see results. I just don't, I've never actually seen that. And so a lot of the times that awareness piece kind of sort of highlights maybe I'm not doing everything that I think I am. Maybe I'm not as consistent as I am. Maybe I'm not as diligent with my tracking. Maybe I'm not as consistent with how many days of the week that I'm even dieting and so on. So I think that that piece that you brought up is so incredibly important. And then also I wanted to kind of get your insight on something because I personally noticed that when I schedule my day out, and this is something that I did get from you, was going for the walk after meals. So I actually find that I go for about an hour walk instead because I need to get a really high sleep count in. So I'll like get up in the morning, go for my walk, come back, do about 2.5 hours of work because that's usually how long I can maintain a high level of focus for. Eat my next meal, go out for another hour, do another 2.5 hours of work, and kind of go on like that. Have you personally noticed that any sort of like cognitive benefits in terms of being able to focus better or just sort of improving your workflow and things like that?
100%. And we see that in the research as well. We see when we do randomized controlled trials, we separate groups by those that are sedentary. One group will do 30 minutes of cardio at the end of the day. The other group will do 10 minutes every other hour throughout the day. And the group that does the more frequent movement has superior health outcomes and lower all-cause mortality. So it's a significant difference. The sitting is the new smoking is kind of how it's been referred to. And that even when you separate groups by the most fit to the least fit, and you just look at the most fit groups, the ones that exercise the most, I should say, even people who exercise the most but move less outside the gym have inferior health outcomes than the people who exercise just as much but also move more outside the gym. I don't know if I explained that very well, but the idea that one bout of exercise a day or every other day is enough when you compare it to people who do their gym workout, but then also have more steps, maybe the 10-minute walks in this instance. Those people are healthier, and so it does provide a cognitive benefit, a digestive benefit, but also a health benefit just to move more frequently. 5 minutes out of every hour, get up. I actually had my clients set their clock every hour on the hour, so that an alarm would go off, kind of the way I used to set mine to eat when I was a younger man. And I would eat every 3 hours on the clock, and regardless, I'd have my Tupperwares packed around. In my book bag at school, I had, in college, I had food. I didn't have books. And I had my timer set on my watch, and I would eat whenever that timer went off. And that was my discipline. Set a timer for every hour on the hour. When that timer goes off, get up and walk around for 5 minutes. And you'd be shocked, like you said, recharges your battery, and cognitively, it wakes you up. I thought it was interesting. I was watching, I've known for some time that your memory is best, actually, the memories are preserved much more accurately under stress, with adrenaline. And you notice that, how accurately you can recall something from 10 years ago that was like a car accident, or just something that was very stressful for you, in which there was a high level of adrenaline released. And so there is some proposal that after a 45 or an hour-long study session, that you should go take a contrast shower or jump in an ice bath and get your adrenaline up. I've seen some recommendations by educators that might be a good way to actually preserve the memory from what you're working on. But you're right. We only have a kind of limited ability to absorb and remember so much information at one time. And so the breaks are great for your health, for your cognition, for your memory, for all of that. And generally speaking, memories, I think it was Dr. Matthew Walker, who's the sleep specialist that was on Joe Rogan and has done a lot of podcasts, was talking about how it's not what your memory is improved by sleep. So the next day you recall more information than what you learned that day if you had a good night's sleep, as compared to those people who don't. And so all of those things are important. I wanted to back up for just a second, because you mentioned dietary adherence. And I think it's really important that you said, what kind of tips can I give people in terms of complying with each of these different disciplines, whether it be sleep or training or diet. Willpower is not a good strategy. You will lose that battle every time. You have to kind of subconsciously get in front of the subconscious. By the time you're hungry, it's probably a little too late, and you cannot white knuckle this. You are not undisciplined. You are not lazy. But I will say this, that the enemy is also the victim in this instance. The responsible person is also the only person who can get you through this. So there's a number of strategies that we use, like I mentioned, in terms of the meal prepping, putting your food into Tupperware and having it available. But in terms of getting in front of hunger, we do have some tools in our toolbox that we can utilize. And that's, you're aware of these. Obviously, sleep more decreases the amount of hunger and decreases the amount of hours you're awake during the day at which you would have opportunity to just have another meal. If you're up 19 hours a day, there's a good chance you're not going to be able to survive with just 3 meals. You're going to get too hungry and grab a fourth. The ghrelin hormone is released when you're hungry, or when you don't sleep well, of course, which makes you hungry. Your insulin resistance increases when you don't sleep well, all of those things. So some strategies that we use is to sleep more, first and foremost. Another one is to increase your protein intake. We have the higher satiety, has a higher thermic effect of food, so you net out fewer calories for what you eat. Every 100 calories of protein you eat, you really net out about 70 because of the thermic effect of food. Some other strategies that we utilize for satiety is more fiber, so more protein, more fiber. High satiety foods. Again, we're back to whole foods as opposed to ultra-processed, highly palatable foods. We see in research, when we ask people to eat ad libitum, or at their leisure, if they eat whole foods, they eat at least 500 calories a day less than if they eat ultra-processed foods. And so that's just a matter of hedonism and the food just tasting better, you eat more of it. There's high satiety foods, boiled potatoes, oranges, will give you a lot more satiation than, say, rice or orange juice. And so even mechanically speaking, how long it takes you to cut and chew steak and how long it takes it to digest as opposed to ground beef seems like a minimal thing, but you can shovel down a whole lot of monster mash. That's kind of why I designed it, was for people who were trying to get a lot of calories in. So I blended it with white rice and bone broth and scrambled eggs and ground beef. So you could shovel in a whole large serving, digest it quickly, and be hungry again sooner. But for people who are dieting in a calorie deficit, I'll use steak, I'll use boiled potatoes, I'll use higher fiber foods like fruit and vegetables. Just they're more satiated for longer, so they don't have to white knuckle hunger until the next meal. Eating slower and not being distracted. If you're sitting there watching TV or on your iPhone, the chances are you'll probably sit there longer and eat more. Water is another good one, just in terms of filling your stomach up and expanding the rugae of the stomach, which sends the signal to the brain for satiety. So if I sit down at a restaurant and if I'm dieting, I'll have somebody order like an iced tea and a diet soda and sit there and crush both of them before their food comes. The chances are they'll be satiated quicker and eat less as a result of having consumed all of that fluid prior to eating. So those are just some strategies. Hunger is the #1 reason why people fail on a diet. And so if we don't get in front of that, we're going to lose this battle. There is a medication that you might be familiar with, semaglutide, which has gotten rave reviews recently, and people having 3 times the weight loss as a regular dieter. And all it does is it suppresses appetite. It makes you less hungry. That's all it does. It's not a fat burner or anything like that. It just eliminates some of that need for willpower and that hunger, so that you're not eating as much as often. And so if you can use strategies in the absence of the need of semaglutide, that's fine, but it's a very safe medication. I work with the folks at Marek Health, MAREK health.com. And they prescribe it. A lot of very reputable MDs, the folks from, who am I thinking of? Oh, Docs Who Lift, Dr. Nadolsky and his brother, highly recommend it. And there are MDs who use it as part of their obesity practice. And so it's just, I don't want everybody just straight running to the doctor and getting a prescription, but I'm just saying that what works is satiety, and that the idea that you're going to overcome hunger and be successful with strictly willpower, that's a fruitless endeavor. So I would encourage people to use all the strategies available to you to decrease hunger.
So it's funny, you mentioned quite a few things there, and actually a lot of the research you talked about, literally within the last week, I specifically made posts on that was discussing that exact research.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I did want to touch on actually was boredom eating and emotional eating that you mentioned, right? Like if you're awake for longer, you just have more opportunity to consume more calories. And a lot of that is just kind of out of boredom. Like I've certainly even noticed it for myself. Like if I just kind of don't have anything to do and I'm like sort of lounging around, I'll find myself just sort of trying to kill time by cooking things or snacking on things.
Yeah.
And that is definitely dysregulated as well. And some of the research actually, like I've actually had to implement some of these strategies in with my clients, where I tell them like, hey, what the research shows is, and this isn't me saying this is me actually paraphrasing pretty closely what the research says for those who are listening. Boredom and emotional eating is typically due to individuals who, or is typically experienced by individuals who experience a lack of meaning and fulfillment in their life, right? So it's like, if you're not really fulfilled in your relationships and your job and your social life and all that stuff, there's a higher probability of you succumbing to things like emotional eating or boredom eating. And so one of the things that I actually have prescribed with a very high degree of success has actually been encouraging my lifters, when appropriate, to go out and actually just spend more time with their friends. Like I'll maybe be like, hey, I want you to go with your friends twice a week, or I want you to go for a bike ride, or I want you to do, something where you're getting out of the house and it's engaging. And it actually works very, very well, because then I'm like, hey, how's your hunger? And it went from like a 4 out of 5 hunger to like a 2.5 or a 3, which is way more manageable. And so it's definitely something worth talking about. But
well, that was one of the things I mentioned in terms of just not having those things in the house or having alternatives that are lower calorie. But you know, the weight control registry has tracked over 10,000 successful dieters for over a decade now, and who have lost over 66 pounds and kept it off for greater than 6 years. And one of the 98% of them went on a diet. So a plan is better than no plan. They actually did have a diet plan. And that diet has to be something that's compatible for you. It's easiest for you to comply with. There's no diet better than the other: keto, intermittent fasting, vertical diet for that case, paleo. It doesn't matter. Pick the one that is the least restrictive to you. Most of them walked. Some 90+% of them increased their activity, and walking was the #1 activity. And a very large number of them watched less TV. And you just hit the nail on the head. If you're sitting at home watching TV just out of sheer boredom, eating is going to be the behavior that's going to accompany that. And so, find alternative things to engage you, hopefully some that you're on your feet, because the non-exercise activity thermogenesis from just being more active throughout the day is hugely beneficial for weight loss, more so than exercise. Just getting that step count in, being active. And so all those things are, you hit the nail right on the head. All those things are hugely important for dietary compliance. And you also said something really important. You said, why is this? Why am I eating? And a good dietitian will ask their clients to actually keep track of that. When you're eating, why are you eating? Are you hungry? Are you bored? Are you stressed? Is this trauma? Because there's a number of different reasons why people eat: to feel better, and to combat maybe some stress or some trauma in their life. So if you can start to identify these things and maybe address the source of the eating behavior, which isn't always hunger, then maybe you can learn to cope with that, whether it be through counseling or otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And so there are a couple things as well that you brought up, talking about points of friction. So just to refer back to one of the comments you made about when you're eating out. So you go out with your friends and you make sure that you have like a Diet Coke and a water. You pound both those back before the food even gets there. I think that's a really great sort of concept, not even necessarily that specific example, but just that general idea of like, how can we create more points of friction? Like you mentioned, if you don't have garbage food in the house, it's going to be more difficult to go out and get it. If you don't have skip the dishes, that's on your phone, like the app. It's going to be one more thing you have to do. If you go out to eat with your friends, but you eat before, it's just removing the hunger, at least some of the hunger. Even if you continue to eat out and you decide you're going to eat out, you're almost guaranteed to eat less and do less damage because of that.
So, I do that too. I'll eat first and maybe just go get an appetizer.
Yeah, exactly. And so I wanted to I guess I wanted you to kind of touch on that in terms of like creating points of friction, because you also mentioned creating points of friction with unproductive behaviors relative to your goals. But then you also talked about, hey, we need to make these objectives really easy. So what are these behaviors that we can make very simple? So how do you approach that sort of balance between, simplifying these productive and desirable behaviors while simultaneously making the other ones a little bit more difficult to access, let's say?
Yeah, that's difficult because I actually encourage people to be cautious about how much they dine out. That's where we tend to eat a lot of extra calories. And the calories at those restaurants tend to be vastly underreported on the menus, and usually off by greater than 50%. And there's a lot of quote unquote hidden calories in there because they cook those foods in a lot of fat, whether it's butter or oils. I'll get somebody on the vertical diet who eats a top sirloin steak at home, and it might yield from 270 to 310 calories. You go out to a restaurant like Ruth's Chris, and they melt an entire stick of butter and serve you up a ribeye, and now you're talking about 1,500 calories for the same size steak. And so there's a huge difference in terms of the caloric intake based, on palatability, fat, how it's prepared, etc. So, and I don't want people to be antisocial, but like, we just discussed, I might eat my healthy meal and then go out and just grab a diet soda or a snack or something at the restaurant. And if I am going to have a meal, then I'm chasing protein first, and lean proteins at that. Generally eating out, you're talking about chicken salads or a sirloin steak salad or something. Try and get lots of protein at that meal, and be cautious about how it's prepared, whether it's in a pool of oil or with butter on top. It can be hard to do. And I don't want people to be antisocial, but I'm telling you, the fast food restaurants and the restaurants in general, if you just pull up your month's credit card and look at how much money you spent and how many calories, and just imagine how many calories you probably consumed just dining out at any place that, even if it's Subway or Chipotle. Look at your credit card statement. I bet it's pretty significant. You might even save money if you used, say, a meal prep service, and you certainly save time and money if you prepped your own meals. Having said that, I've had clients who have had to eat out because they're not home all day. They travel, they work on the road, whether it's a police, fire, or ambulance, and they're 24 hours on a shift or 12 plus hours. People who even a real estate agent, a mom that takes her kids to school in the morning, works all day out of the trunk of her car, and then has to pick them up in the evening and then take them to an event or something, a sporting event or what have you. I prep my meals in the morning when I'm cooking breakfast for myself and my kids, and I put them in thermos, those little 24-ounce thermos. They're like $20 on Amazon, and I have 2 of those with me. And even when I'm home, they just sit on the counter. But if I go somewhere, I can grab it, throw it in my backpack, or take it with me. And then if I find myself somewhere where it's my meal time, at least I know I'm eating the foods that feel good on me with the macros and the calories that I want. If that's not available, and I've designed programs for, I'm going to rat him out here. I work with John Jones, the UFC fighter, and John kind of likes to eat when he wants to eat and what he wants to eat. And so initially I send him prep meals, and from the Vertical Diets, my meal prep company, I deliver meals nationwide. And so I sent him a lot of perfectly prepared meals. I even made one especially for him that was the right protein, macro content and everything. He didn't eat them. He went to fast food places. That's what he enjoys. That's what he's always done. So I had to pull up the menus of all the fast food places that he likes to frequent, and simply look at and try and select the menu items that had a 2-to-1 protein to fat ratio. That's kind of my go-to. This is true with, say, high school kids that are traveling for sports. They don't have an opportunity to meal prep. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And so I tell them, sure, you can go to McDonald's, you can go to Burger King, you can go to Subway. Here's what you should order off that menu. And I actually sent him screenshots of everything that he was allowed to order, as though I could tell John what to do. And, like you go to Subway and get the meatball sandwich, it's not very high in protein, it's very high in fat. But if you get the steak sandwich, a very different scenario. You get a high protein, lower fat. And so it's little choices like those. At most fast food restaurants, you're probably going to end up with the chicken meals in order to get a high enough protein intake and a low enough fat content to satisfy what I think are optimal macronutrients. Because most of the meats are like a 75-25 beef, which just throws you way out of your fats. It's almost like the equivalence of a hot dog at that point. And so I make those recommendations for folks based on their lifestyle, so that they can comply and not feel as though they just give up on it altogether because they're not doing it perfectly.
So there's a couple things there and one of the things that's sort of been pretty consistent just along this conversation we've been having has been, for most circumstances, really quickly you have an answer. You have a way you can pivot and kind of continue moving forward in a productive way towards your goals. And the thing that I think most people struggle with is they see guys like you where they're like, wow, he's nailing everything. He must be so disciplined. Yes, obviously you're disciplined, but you also have years and years and years developing these skills. And one of the ways that I like to kind of talk about dieting as a quote unquote skill is we can break down eating or dieting, let's say, into its components. We can say, okay, can you actually buy this food? Yes. Can you eat this food? Yes. Can you not eat these foods? Yes. Can you time when you're eating them? Yes. Okay, great. That's sort of like me teaching someone how to jab. If I spend like a week with someone, I can train them how to jab perfectly. It looks excellent. Anyone who doesn't know them will think that they're a very good amateur. Throw them in the ring with someone, and that jab is going to turn to dog shit because now they're having to do it all together while someone's trying to beat the crap out of them.
Yeah, Ronda Rousey learned that.
Yeah, exactly.
You look great on pads.
Exactly. And that's kind of how I see dieting. And so I think a lot of the times, exactly what you said in the beginning, people try and take on way too much. But I think that as you start to get better, your tolerance for more responsibilities grows and your willingness to do these things grow because you're just getting more results, you're seeing the benefits. And so how do you go about that process of taking someone who, is just not very good at all of this stuff. They know what to do, but they're really just struggling to kind of dial all these things in. How do you sort of know when to progress them? At what point do you start adding more and more things on, giving them more responsibilities, more tasks, more tools that they can utilize and implement?
Yeah, it would depend on what their current circumstance was, what kind of experience they already had. I love meal prep. I mean, and it sounds biased because I sell it, but I don't care who you buy it from. It's so freaking convenient, and the macros are right there. Generally, a good meal prep company has got a 2-to-1 protein to fat ratio, so it's not overcomplicated, and it really is a calorie equation. If you need 2,200 calories a day to be in a deficit and lose weight, then I really don't care as long as you get sufficient protein. Where those calories come from. Generally speaking, it's so long as you can comply. And we talked about the fact that, Pop-Tarts are going to be overconsumed as compared to high protein foods. So meal prep's number one, but then also when people are traveling, I have a lot of these, I have little grocery shopping lists or a quick breakfast tips in my Vertical Diet 3.0 ebook, just because those are things that questions people have asked me over the years. I've gotten over 100,000 DMs in the last 10 years from people with questions, and a lot of them are the same kind of cluster of questions. And so I've already formulated answers and updated those responses inside of my ebook, and then I copy and paste and send them. I'm probably on my DMs way more than an hour and a half, 2 hours a day, just answering random questions from people who, had they read my book, would already know the answer. But and I just copy and paste. Like, for instance, somebody said, look, I wasn't able to prep meals. I'm on this trip. I'll send them a grocery shopping list from Walmart where, as opposed to going to Carl's Jr., just pull into Walmart. And there they've got, hard-boiled eggs, yogurt, cheese, fruits, everything you can imagine is right there. Just take your cart and go through. And sometimes you can even pick up a little styrofoam cooler and a bag of ice on the way out. And what you don't eat, you can throw in there and take back to your hotel room and have your next 2 meals. And so there's plenty of opportunity. I mean, there's lots and lots of food at the grocery store that's preferable to what you would get in a fast food place. It would take you the same time to shop for that as it would to eat, go somewhere else and have a meal that might be significantly higher in calories. So those are some of the strategies that I use. And it just kind of depends on how experienced they are, what their circumstance is in terms of whether they're home or away, etc.
Mm-hmm. No, that totally makes sense. So I wanted to talk a little bit about effort as well. I guess just to kind of wrap things up. So one of the things that I think a lot of the times people are looking for is they're looking for results, but they don't necessarily want to try super hard. And even higher level athletes, like, I'm sure you're not surprised because you've been doing this for a very long time, but I think a lot of people might be surprised to hear that even high level athletes, I've trained several who are super talented, but just have absolutely terrible nutrition and lifestyle habits.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're that genetically gifted that you got here in spite of all these things. And so it's really difficult for some people to understand, like, or for some people to sort of want to put in that level of effort, and there's a bit of a disconnect, especially now, because now we have this like push for, hey, we need medication. And I'm not hating on medication. I think it can be really beneficial for some people, but I also think that certain people will jump to pull that lever a little too soon, and there's this sort of idea of people wanting something for nothing. And so, when you're going through that process, how do you sort of help people see that they need to be putting in more effort? How do you sort of have that conversation with people to really progress the level of effort that they're willing to invest in order to kind of accomplish their goals? And we're not necessarily talking about just Joe Blow who needs to lose 20 pounds. We're talking about people who are competitive athletes, whether it's powerlifting, bodybuilding, strongman, whatever, who are serious about their goals, but they're kind of struggling, and they're, let's say, on the verging into the intermediate stages of like dieting, if we can say.
Well, if it's a professional athlete whose sport is much different than lifting, football, MMA, etc. You name the sport. Oftentimes they might not really recognize the benefit of the training, or it's not enjoyable to them. They love playing their sport, but they don't like time in the gym. Which is interesting you ask the question, because just yesterday, Dr. Pat Davidson made a post where he said, look, if you want them to do the things that you want to do, you better incorporate a lot of the things that they like to do, and then just try and tack it on there somehow, so you can get the results that you want. A lot of athletes, like you said, that are very gifted, they might just want to go in and do some Pilates. And you got to find a way to actually improve force production. That's not going to happen with Pilates. And so you kind of fashion the workout around what they enjoy. So you got to experiment with a lot of different exercises. Squatting is not terribly enjoyable for a lot of MMA guys. We love it, sure. But if you try a box squat with an SSB bar, all of a sudden they're like, hey, yeah, I kind of like this. And then if you measure it, and then I always train with a lot of my athletes so that I can kind of compete with them in a sense, and at least they can see what they're potentially capable of, and then they're really happy when they set a PR. That's what they want to do. They want to win. So can you create wins for them in the gym, doing things they enjoy that are measurable? And so I try and find exercises that they like, as I just mentioned. Even the posterior chain stuff, such as a good morning off of pins or chains, is a lot more enjoyable, because you're doing most of the concentric portion, which is pretty important for athletes anyhow, to limit fatigue and just give them exercises that give them a big benefit without tiring them out so they can't do their sport. That's a big one. I think just making it fun. I do the same thing with the 6-year-olds in my kids' power hour every Sunday here at Sin City Iron. I've got kids that are 6, 7, 8, 9 years old that come in and lift. And if I have them trying to perform a perfect squat with a broomstick, and had them try and do that week after week after week, they would be very bored. They would never come back. I'm getting incredible feedback. My attendance is 100% every week. The kids are like, I love it, and they're excited, because I put them under a bar on pins and have them do, say, partial squats, which most trainers would just what, partial squats? It's fun, and it introduces some loading, and they enjoy it, and they'll come back. And really, over time, then I just try and lower the pins as they become better at squatting. I'm just trying to get them to enjoy the process. So it's the same with me with athletes. If I can find exercises they enjoy. And I find this a lot now as I work with guys that are in their 40s or 50s that maybe lifted at a high level, and they keep trying to do all the things they used to do, and it's breaking them down. Their knees hurt, their hips hurt, their elbows hurt, they're sore all the time. I experienced that myself after I retired from powerlifting. I kept trying to go to the gym and do low bar squats, and I was just sore and tired all the time. My joints hurt all the time. I talked about this in a couple of videos, my Keys to Pain-Free Knees video, and I broke my back video, about the injuries that I was suffering because I was 50 years old and still trying to back squat. Well, here I am at nearly 55, and I've finally figured out over the last few years that you can substitute low fatigue movements, so you get a high stimulus to fatigue ratio, that don't cause you to have brain fog the next day and wake up in the morning trying to take an inventory of what hurts and limp to the shower. I don't do that anymore. I feel fantastic. And I just pulled a 700 deadlift last week. But I'm prepping for that, not using a ton of heavy deadlifts, but using SSB bar box squats, which don't infer a lot of fatigue. I feel great the next day. And again, my good mornings are off of pins. And so I'm not reversing the weight and doing a whole ton of eccentric loading damage, and a lot of, I hate to use the word CNS, stress, but I feel fantastic, and my knees feel great because I do 3 10-minute recumbent bikes a day, kind of on a HIIT session style of 40 seconds under modest tension with a 20-second rest. I repeat that 10 times, but I do it 3 times a day. So I'm pumping tons and tons and tons of blood in my knees and legs, all concentrically, so I'm not, breaking down any muscle tissue or creating any fatigue. And I get up off that little biking session, you almost feel like you had a little leg pump, and my joints feel fantastic. And so I encourage lifters who have accumulated a lot of repetitive strain or just loading, maybe tendonitis, and I mean, it was to the point where I couldn't do a leg extension, and I was limping every day with my hip, and my knees were sore. Fully rehabilitated. I presumed it was going to be a permanent arthritic condition because of what I put my body through competing, and come to find out that's not the case. You're just improperly loading your program is just too hard, too much fatigue for the stimulus. And so I don't mind doing leg presses with half the weight, but my feet are in and low, and I'm using a greater range of motion, and I'm pausing at the base, so I'm not making my tendons, those are all shock absorbers. So I'm cautious with speed at my age. I don't want to be absorbing things with my tendons at a fast, with a lot of acceleration. So I kind of deload the stretch position when I'm able to set up, say, reverse bands or something on a leg press. And if I can eliminate some of the load or the speed when I'm in a stretched position, then my tendons feel a lot better, and I just do a little higher repetition stuff to accumulate the volume or the stress that my body needs to grow or to get stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a really great sort of I guess heuristic. It's like start with something that you enjoy, make it engaging, make it something that is fun, but then also has some sort of reward attached to it. And then I mean, like, even if it's something like you were saying with getting more sleep, like that's something that's real hard for most people. But when you wake up one day and you're like, I feel great, you remember that, like, that's a lasting feeling. And then every time after that, if you keep looking at your phone, you're like, oh man, I'm not going to feel as good. And so it can be a pretty powerful motivator for sure. So I think that's a fantastic way of kind of evaluating the next step and then where to progress as well. It's like, okay, well, what do you think we can do next? Here are going to be the big stones, but there's 4 of them. Which one do you think is going to be best for you? And then they can kind of select it and be a little bit more involved in the process. This is completely unrelated to any of this conversation we've been having. However, I am curious. Do you know when John Jones is fighting next?
I don't. Ngannou hurt his knee and had surgery, and so that kind of postponed the super fight. I think he was talking about fighting Stipe, and then I think Stipe in training had some sort of eye injury, orbital socket or something. I'm just talking out of secondhand information.
Yeah.
But it just seems like the stars haven't aligned, or maybe they have, because John from the get-go said he's patient. He'd love the super fight. He's like, I want to be patient. I want to be ready. I'd like to fight Ngannou, and Ngannou's still undefeated and has one more fight left in the UFC under his contract. And John hesitated not to jump in too soon with a different opponent, because he really liked the specter of a super fight, which that would be most certainly. John is he's made a lot of progress. I spent many months with him, getting him up well over 250 pounds. He's faster, he's stronger, he's in great condition mentally as well, because he went through some tough times there, and admittedly a lot of them at his own fault. But he's in a good place, and I'm excited. He's a phenomenally talented fighter, and I'd love to see, just without any bias, I'm just a big UFC fan. I just love to see a big fight like that. It's exciting to me.
I don't see Ngannou winning. I don't think he's even remotely on John's level. The only person that I think would be interesting for John at heavyweight would be maybe Cyril.
Yeah.
And I also suspect that John would probably be able to take him down. So I'm like, he's just so freaking good. He's so good.
He really is. And he's so incredibly competitive. I was with John for, almost a year. Every other week, I trained every session with him, worked out with him every day, ate meals with him every day. I've kind of always been that way myself. It's win, everything you got to win. But this guy, he can't lose a single round of anything, even in practice. And he's sought out, some great training partners to hone his skills. I'm really pleased with his progress, and I think that he's going to be as good or better than ever, and which is I think bodes well for, I think, what's going to be kind of one of the biggest fights in history in the UFC.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, now that that's done, where can people find you, Stan?
Everything's Stan Efferding. StanEfferding.com is my website, and that's where I have a link to the Vertical Diet Meal Prep, nationwide meal prep. I'll send Monster Mash to your door and a host of any other 35 meals that we prepare every day. My Vertical Diet 3.0 ebook is over 225 pages with more than 200 references to peer-reviewed published research and articles and videos from a lot of very reputable sources all throughout the community. Instagram, Stan Efferding. I post a lot of content on there. And YouTube, I have a lot of free content. My Rhinos rants are I spent some good amount of time putting those together. They're pretty informative. Rhinos rants on YouTube is Stan Efferding.
Awesome. So all that stuff's going to be linked up in the show notes, guys. Make sure you go check him out, give him a follow. He puts out a lot of great content. Stan, thanks so much for jumping on, man.
Yeah, and I want to conclude by saying that I mentioned AmericHealth.com. On my website, I have a link to get a blood test. It's only like $125 to get a very comprehensive blood panel. We talked a lot about athletes and their health. It's one of the first things I recommend to all my athletes: get a blood test. You can do it from home through AmericHealth.com. And they'll just email you a form. You go to LabCorp, and 3 days later, they send you the results. And you can at least have a good idea of your general health while you pursue your fitness goals.
Awesome, man. All right. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, brother.